The plane wheels touched down at Heathrow Airport with a gentle bump that woke Jake from his restless sleep. He stretched his arms and looked out the small airplane window at the gray London sky. After months of planning and saving money, he was finally here, in England, the land of kings and queens. Jake worked as a sales manager at a car dealership back in Denver, Colorado. He wasn't rich, but he had been saving every extra dollar for 2 years just for this trip. His dream was simple: see the famous places he had only watched in movies and TV shows. Buckingham Palace, Big Ben, the London Bridge, all the stuff that made England feel magical to him. As he walked through the busy airport, pulling his black suitcase behind him, Jake felt excited but also nervous. This was his first time traveling outside America. He had never been on such a long flight before, and everything felt different here. Even the signs looked fancy with their proper English spelling. The taxi ride to his hotel took forever because of London traffic. Jake pressed his face against the window like a kid, staring at the red double-decker buses and the old buildings that looked hundreds of years old. The taxi driver, a friendly man with a thick accent, kept pointing out famous spots along the way. "That's where the Queen used to live," the driver said, pointing to a huge building with golden gates. "Buckingham Palace, mate. Quite a sight, isn't it?" Jake's eyes went wide. Even from the street, the palace looked incredible. The golden gates sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, and he could see the famous Red Guards standing perfectly still like statues. He had seen them in movies, but seeing them in real life was different. They looked so serious and important. "Do they really stand there all day without moving?" Jake asked the driver. "Oh yes, mate. Rain or shine, hot or cold. Those guards don't budge for nothing. It's their job, and they take it very seriously. Been doing it for hundreds of years, they have." Jake couldn't believe it. How could someone stand so still for hours? He made a mental note to come back later and see them up close. His hotel was small but clean, just a 10-minute walk from the palace. The lady at the front desk had a sweet accent and gave him a map of the area with all the tourist spots marked in bright colors. She also warned him about pickpockets and told him to be careful with his belongings. After dropping his bags in his room, Jake decided to take a quick walk around the neighborhood. He was too excited to rest, even though his body was still confused about what time it was. The jet lag made him feel dizzy, but he pushed through it. The streets near Buckingham Palace were crowded with tourists from all over the world. He heard people speaking different languages: Spanish, French, something that sounded like Japanese. Everyone had cameras and phones out, taking pictures of everything. Jake found a small pub called the Crown and Anchor, just 2 blocks from his hotel. It looked exactly like the pubs he had seen in movies. Dark wood, low ceilings, and the smell of beer and fried food. Perfect. Inside, the pub was warm and cozy. A few locals sat at the bar, drinking pints and watching a soccer game on TV. Jake ordered his first British beer, a pint of something called London Pride that the bartender recommended. The beer was different from what he was used to back home. It was warmer and had a richer taste, but after a few sips he started to like it. The bartender, an older man with gray hair, was friendly and asked where Jake was visiting from. "Denver, Colorado," Jake said proudly. "First time in London. Actually, first time outside America." "Well then, welcome to London, mate," the bartender said with a big smile. "You picked a good time to visit. Weather's been decent, and there's always something happening around the palace." As Jake drank his beer, he chatted with a couple from Australia who were also tourists. They had been in London for 3 days and gave him advice about the best places to visit. They told him about the changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace, which happened every few days. "You have to see it," the Australian woman said. "It's amazing how precise they are. Like a perfectly choreographed dance, but with soldiers." The Australian man laughed. "Just don't try to talk to them or get too close. They take their job very seriously. We saw some tourists yesterday trying to make one of them laugh, and security wasn't too happy about it." Jake nodded, making another mental note. He didn't want to cause any trouble. He was just a tourist trying to have a good time and see the sights. After finishing his beer, Jake walked back toward his hotel, but he couldn't resist taking a detour past Buckingham Palace. The sun was starting to set, and the golden light made the building look even more impressive. There were still crowds of people around, even in the evening. Families with children, couples taking selfies, tour groups following guides with small flags. Jake joined the crowd behind the tall black fence, looking through the bars at the magnificent building. The Red Guards were still there, standing like statues in their bright red uniforms and tall black hats. Jake watched them for several minutes, amazed by how still they could stay. Other tourists were taking pictures with them in the background, but the guards never moved, never even looked at the cameras. One little kid kept trying to wave at a guard to get his attention, but the soldier stared straight ahead like the child wasn't even there. It was impressive and a little bit funny at the same time. Jake took out his phone and snapped a few pictures. He wanted to send them to his friends back home and show them where he was. They would be so jealous. Most of them had never been anywhere more exciting than Las Vegas. As he walked back to his hotel, Jake felt proud of himself. He had made it to London, found a nice place to stay, and even had his first British beer. Tomorrow he planned to do some real sightseeing, maybe take one of those red double-decker bus tours, visit the Tower of London, or see Big Ben up close. The jet lag was starting to hit him hard now. His body felt heavy, and his eyes were getting tired. But he was too excited to sleep right away. Instead, he sat on his small hotel bed and looked through the tourist brochures the hotel had given him. There was so much to see and do. Museums, castles, parks, markets. He wanted to fit everything into his one-week vacation. This was probably the only time he would ever be able to afford a trip like this, so he wanted to make every day count. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Jake dreamed about red guards and golden palaces, double-decker buses and fish and chips. Tomorrow would be the start of his real London adventure, and he couldn't wait to see what the city had in store for him. Jake woke up the next morning feeling confused about what time it was. The jet lag made his brain foggy, but he was still excited about his second day in London. He grabbed his phone to check messages and saw several texts from his college buddies. "Dude, we're in London too. What are the odds?" The message was from Tony, his old roommate from college. Jake couldn't believe it. He quickly called Tony back, and it turned out that Tony and two other guys from their old friend group were also in London for vacation. They had planned their trip months ago but never mentioned it to Jake. "We're staying near Camden Market," Tony explained over the phone, "but we can meet you wherever you are. We've been here for 2 days already, and we know all the best spots." Jake was thrilled. Having familiar faces around would make his trip even better. They agreed to meet at a pub near Buckingham Palace around noon. Jake had plenty of time to grab breakfast and walk around a bit before meeting his friends. He found a small cafe near his hotel that served traditional English breakfast. The plate was huge: eggs, bacon, sausages, baked beans, grilled tomatoes, and something called black pudding that looked scary but tasted pretty good. The coffee was stronger than he was used to, but it helped wake him up. After breakfast, Jake walked around the neighborhood, getting familiar with the streets. London was bigger and busier than he had imagined. Cars drove on the wrong side of the road, which confused him every time he tried to cross a street. He had to remind himself to look right first, then left. At exactly noon, Jake arrived at the Royal Oak, the pub where they had agreed to meet. It was bigger than the place he had visited yesterday, with more tourists and a louder atmosphere. He spotted his friends immediately. Tony, Rick, and Danny were sitting at a corner table with several empty beer glasses already in front of them. "Jake!" Tony shouted across the pub, waving him over. "You made it." The reunion was loud and full of backslapping and jokes. Jake hadn't seen these guys in over a year, since Tony's wedding back in Chicago. They all lived in different cities now, but had stayed in touch through social media and occasional phone calls. "We started early today," Rick explained, holding up his half-empty beer glass. "We figured we needed to try as many British beers as possible while we're here. You know, for cultural education." Danny laughed. "Cultural education, right? That's what we're calling it." Jake ordered a beer and joined them. It felt good to have friends around, people who knew him and shared his sense of humor. The guys had been exploring London for 2 days and had stories about everything they had seen. "Yesterday we went to the Tower of London," Tony said. "Did you know they used to cut people's heads off there? Like a lot of people, including 2 of King Henry's wives." "That's dark, man," Jake said, taking a sip of his beer. "But cool, right?" Rick added. "This whole city is full of crazy history. We walked across London Bridge yesterday, too. Not as impressive as I thought it would be, but still pretty neat." The guys ordered another round of beers and started planning what to do for the rest of the day. Danny pulled out a crumpled tourist map and spread it on the table between the beer glasses. "We were thinking of doing one of those hop-on, hop-off bus tours," Danny said. "You know, the red double-decker ones. We can see a bunch of stuff without walking too much, Jake thought that sounded perfect. He had wanted to try the bus tour anyway, and doing it with friends would be more fun. As they waited for their food to arrive, the friends caught up on their lives back home. Tony was working as an accountant in Phoenix and had recently bought a house with his wife. Rick was still single and working in tech in Austin. Danny had moved to Portland and was working for a brewery, which explained why he seemed to know so much about different types of beer. "This is way better than the stuff we used to drink in college," Danny said, holding up his pint. "Remember those cheap cans we used to buy? This actually has flavor." The food arrived, fish and chips for everyone except Tony, who ordered something called bangers and mash that turned out to be sausages with mashed potatoes. Everything was heavier and more filling than Jake expected, but it tasted good, especially with the beer. As they ate, more tourists filled the pub. Jake noticed that most people seemed to be having a good time, laughing and taking pictures with their food. There was a festive atmosphere, like everyone was on vacation and determined to enjoy themselves. "So what's the plan after lunch?" Jake asked. "Well," Tony said, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret, "we heard that if you time it right, you can see the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. It's supposed to be this whole ceremony with music and marching." Rick nodded enthusiastically. "The bartender at our hotel told us it's happening today around 3 o'clock. We should definitely check it out." Jake remembered the Australian couple from yesterday mentioning the same thing. It did sound like something worth seeing, especially since he was staying so close to the palace. "Count me in," Jake said. "But maybe we should slow down on the beer if we want to remember it clearly." Danny laughed. "Come on, Jake, we're on vacation in England. When are we going to get another chance to drink authentic British beer in authentic British pubs? We can pace ourselves." But even as Danny said it, he was already signaling the bartender for another round. Jake noticed that his friends were definitely more relaxed about drinking than he remembered from college. They were older now, with more money and fewer responsibilities to worry about while on vacation. The conversation turned to their jobs and how they had managed to get time off for this trip. Tony had saved up vacation days for over a year. Rick worked remotely sometimes so he could extend his trip by working from London for a few days. Danny's job at the brewery gave him flexible time off, especially during their slow season. "The best part is that we're all here at the same time, completely by accident," Rick said. "What are the chances of that happening?" Jake had to admit it was pretty amazing. London was a huge city with millions of tourists, and somehow they had all ended up in the same place at the same time without planning it. As they finished their lunch and ordered one more round for the road, Jake felt grateful for the unexpected company. Traveling alone had been nerve-wracking, but now he had his old friends to share the experience with. The pub was getting louder as more people arrived for lunch. Jake noticed that several groups seemed to be tourists like them, Americans, Australians, and people speaking languages he couldn't identify. Everyone seemed to be in a good mood, probably helped by the beer and the excitement of being somewhere new. "All right, gentlemen," Tony said, standing up and finishing his beer. "Time to go see some royal guards and maybe learn some British history." They paid their bill and walked outside into the afternoon sunshine. The beer had made them all a bit louder and more confident than when they had arrived. Jake felt relaxed and happy as they walked toward Buckingham Palace, joking and laughing like they were back in college again. The walk from the pub to Buckingham Palace took about 15 minutes, but it felt shorter, because the guys were having such a good time catching up. The beer had put them all in a great mood, and they were joking around like they were 20 years old again. As they got closer to the palace, they could see crowds of people gathering behind the black iron fence. Tour groups with matching colored hats, families with small children, and couples taking selfies filled the wide sidewalk in front of the famous building. "Wow, look at all these people," Rick said, pulling out his phone to take pictures. "This place is like Disneyland, but with real history." The palace looked even more impressive in the afternoon light than it had the evening before. The golden gates sparkled, and the red guards stood at their posts like perfectly dressed statues. Jake counted at least 6 guards visible from where they were standing, each one completely motionless. "Those guys have to be hot in those uniforms," Danny observed. "It's like 70 degrees out here, and they're wearing those heavy red coats and those huge fuzzy hats." Tony started taking pictures of the guards from different angles. "I bet they're trained not to react to anything. Like they probably practice standing still for hours." The friends found a good spot along the fence where they could see everything clearly. Other tourists were doing the same thing, pointing, taking pictures, and talking about the guards. Some people were trying to get the guards to look at them or react somehow, but the soldiers remained perfectly still. "Check this out," Rick said, showing them his phone. "I just looked it up. These guards are called the Queen's Guard, and they're real soldiers, not just guys in costumes. They're trained to guard the royal family, and they take it super seriously." Jake watched one guard who was standing about 20 feet away from them. The soldier was young, maybe in his 20s, with a serious expression on his face. His red uniform was perfect, not a wrinkle or a spot anywhere. The tall black hat, which Rick's phone said was called a bearskin, made him look even taller and more impressive. "I wonder what they're thinking about while they stand there," Jake said. "Like, do they get bored? Do they think about what they want for dinner?" "Probably thinking about how many tourists are taking pictures of them," Danny laughed. "I bet they see hundreds of people every day trying to get their attention." As they watched, a family with young children approached the guard Jake had been observing. The kids were excited and kept pointing at the soldier, talking loudly about his uniform and hat. The parents were taking pictures while the children waved at the guard and tried to get him to wave back. But the guard didn't move at all. He stared straight ahead like the family wasn't even there. After a few minutes, the family gave up and moved on to look at other guards. "That's actually pretty impressive," Tony said. "I don't think I could stand that still with kids jumping around in front of me." "You couldn't stand that still for 5 minutes even without distractions," Rick teased. "Remember in college when you tried to win that statue contest at the bar? You lasted like 30 seconds, Tony laughed. "That was different. I was drunk." "You're drunk now," Danny pointed out. "Yeah, but not statue contest drunk. That's a whole different level." The friends continued watching the guards and taking pictures. Jake noticed that other tourists were getting more creative in their attempts to get reactions from the soldiers. Some people were making funny faces, others were telling jokes loudly, and a few were even trying to dance in front of the guards. But none of it worked. The guards remained completely professional, staring straight ahead like nothing was happening around them. "You know what?" Rick said, an idea forming in his voice. "I bet there's literally nothing that could make one of these guys break character. They're probably trained to ignore everything." "Everything?" Danny asked with interest. "Everything. Loud noises, people jumping around, whatever. They're like human statues." Jake could see where this conversation was heading, and it made him a little nervous. His friends were getting that look they used to get in college when they were about to do something stupid. "Don't even think about it," Jake warned. "These guys are real soldiers doing their job. We're just tourists." But Tony was already warming up to the idea. "Come on, Jake, we're not going to hurt anyone or cause real trouble. We're just curious about how professional they really are. Besides," Rick added, "we're probably not the first tourists to test their patience. I bet they deal with this stuff all the time." Jake looked around at the other tourists. Most people were being respectful, taking pictures from a reasonable distance and not bothering the guards too much. But he also noticed a few people who were being more aggressive, getting closer than they should, talking loudly right in front of the guards, and generally being disruptive. "Look, there's security around here somewhere," Jake said, trying to talk sense into his friends. "If we cause trouble, we could get in real trouble. This isn't some tourist attraction where they expect people to mess around." Danny took another drink from the beer he had brought with him from the pub. "Jake's probably right. We should just enjoy looking at them and leave them alone." For a moment, Jake thought Danny was going to be the voice of reason, but then Danny continued. "But it would be pretty interesting to see just how well-trained they really are. I mean, we're never going to be here again. When else are we going to get a chance to see authentic British Royal Guards up close?" Tony nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We should make the most of it." "Making the most of it doesn't mean harassing the guards," Jake argued. "We can appreciate their professionalism without testing it." But he could tell his friends weren't really listening to him anymore. The combination of beer, excitement, and being on vacation was making them bolder than they should be. Jake recognized the look in their eyes. It was the same look they had gotten before doing stupid things in college. Rick was studying the guards carefully now, like he was planning something. "I bet if we're creative enough, we could at least get one of them to blink or look our way. Not to cause trouble, just to see if it's possible." "That sounds like causing trouble to me," Jake said firmly. "Come on, Jake," Tony said, putting his arm around Jake's shoulder. "Don't be such a worrier. We're just having fun. What's the worst that could happen? Jake had learned over the years that what's the worst that could happen was usually the question people asked right before the worst thing actually happened. But his friends were already moving closer to the guards, and he didn't want to be left behind. As they approached one of the guards, Jake noticed that several other tourists had the same idea. A small crowd was forming around the soldier, with people taking pictures and talking loudly about how still he could stand. The guard they chose was standing near the corner of the fence, a perfect position for getting close. He looked to be in his early 20s with a serious expression and perfect posture. His uniform was spotless, and his tall black hat made him look like something from a history book. "Okay," Rick said quietly to the group. "Let's see just how professional these guys really are." Jake watched nervously as his friends moved closer to the Royal Guard. The soldier stood perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead as if the growing crowd of tourists around him didn't exist at all. Other people were taking pictures and making comments, but the guard remained like a statue. "This is incredible," Tony whispered, pulling out his phone to record. "Look how still he is. It's like he's not even real." Rick started making faces at the guard, crossing his eyes and sticking out his tongue. A few other tourists laughed and joined in, thinking it was all harmless fun. But the guard didn't react at all. He stared straight ahead with the same serious expression he had maintained for hours. "Try saying something to him, Danny," suggested to Rick. "Maybe he'll at least look at you." Rick stepped closer and started talking directly to the guard in a loud voice. "Hello there, Mr. Guard. Nice hat you have there. Is it heavy? Do you ever get tired of standing there?" Nothing. The guard's expression didn't change at all. He continued staring straight ahead like Rick wasn't even there. Jake felt increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "Guys, maybe we should back off a little. Other people want to take pictures too." But his friends were getting more excited by the guard's complete lack of response. To them it was like a challenge or a game. They had never seen anything like it before. "I bet nothing could make this guy react," Rick said confidently. "He's like a robot or something." "There has to be something," Tony replied, thinking hard. "Everyone has a breaking point, right?" Danny had been quiet for a moment, but now he had an idea. "You know what? I bet even if someone accidentally bumped into him or something, he still wouldn't move." "Accidentally?" Rick asked with a grin. "Well, you know, things happen in crowds. People bump into each other all the time." Jake could see where this was going, and he didn't like it. "Come on, guys. Leave the man alone. He's just doing his job." "We're not going to hurt him," Tony said. "We're just curious about how well trained he really is." The guard they were focusing on was young, probably not much older than they were. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and every button and piece of equipment was in exactly the right place. Jake could see that the soldier took his job very seriously, and that made him feel even worse about what his friends were planning. "Look, there are probably rules about this stuff," Jake tried again. "We could get in trouble, or worse, we could get him in trouble for not stopping us." But his friends weren't listening anymore. The beer and the excitement of being in a foreign country had made them bold. They were feeding off each other's energy, each one trying to come up with a more creative way to test the guard's patience. "What if we stood really close to him?" Rick suggested. "Like invaded his personal space? Or what if we tried to take a selfie with him?" Tony added. "Get right up next to him for the picture?" Danny was holding his plastic cup of beer from the pub, the same beer he had been drinking for the last hour. He looked at the cup, then at the guard, then back at the cup. Jake could see the wheels turning in Danny's head, and he didn't like what he was thinking. "Danny, whatever you're thinking, don't do it," Jake warned. "I'm not thinking anything," Danny said, but his voice had that mischievous tone Jake remembered from college. "I'm just wondering what would happen if someone accidentally spilled something." "Accidentally," Rick repeated, emphasizing the word. "Like totally by accident," Tony agreed. Jake looked around desperately, hoping to see security or police nearby who might discourage his friends from doing something stupid. But the area was filled with tourists, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. No one was paying attention to their little group specifically. "Seriously, guys, this is a bad idea," Jake said firmly. "These guards are real soldiers. This isn't some theme park where they expect people to mess with them." "We're not going to mess with him," Danny said. "We're just going to see how professional he really is." The guard continued standing perfectly still, completely unaware of the conversation happening just a few feet away from him. His eyes were focused on a point in the distance, and his face showed no emotion at all. He was doing exactly what he had been trained to do. Jake watched as Danny moved closer to the guard, still holding his plastic cup of beer. Other tourists were moving around them, taking pictures and chatting, creating a perfect cover for whatever Danny was planning. "Danny, don't," Jake said one more time. But Danny was already committed to his plan. Jake could see it in his eyes, that same reckless confidence that had gotten them all in trouble back in college. The same look Danny had gotten before he decided to climb the water tower, or before he tried to convince a professor that his term paper was actually a work of performance art. "It's just beer," Danny said quietly. "It's not like it's going to hurt him. His uniform probably gets dirty from rain and stuff anyway." Rick and Tony were encouraging him with their expressions, even though they weren't saying anything out loud. They were all caught up in the moment, the excitement of being somewhere foreign, and the false confidence that came from drinking in the middle of the afternoon. Jake made one last desperate attempt to stop what was about to happen. "Think about this, Danny. Really think about it. Is this worth it? What if there are consequences you haven't thought about?" Danny paused for just a moment, and Jake hoped he might be getting through to him. But then Danny shook his head and grinned. "We're tourists, Jake. We're supposed to have crazy stories to tell when we get home. Besides, what are they going to do? Arrest us for spilling beer?" And with that, Danny raised his plastic cup and deliberately poured the entire contents onto the royal guard's pristine red uniform and black bearskin hat. The beer splashed across the guard's chest and dripped down his jacket. Some of it got on his face, but the soldier didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't wipe the beer away. He continued staring straight ahead with the same serious expression, even as beer dripped from his hat onto his nose. For a moment, everything seemed frozen. The tourists around them stopped talking. People turned to look at what had happened. Phones came out to record the aftermath. Jake felt his stomach drop. He knew immediately that this was going to be much worse than his friends had imagined. The guard's complete professionalism in the face of such disrespect somehow made Danny's actions seem even more terrible. Danny stood there grinning, apparently proud of what he had done. Rick and Tony were laughing and taking pictures. But Jake could see the expressions on other people's faces, and they weren't amused. They looked shocked and angry. The royal guard continued to stand perfectly still, beer dripping from his uniform, showing the kind of discipline and professionalism that made Danny's action look even more childish and disrespectful. Jake realized that his friends had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and he had a sinking feeling that the consequences were going to be swift and severe. The moment Danny's beer hit the royal guard's uniform, everything changed. The cheerful tourist atmosphere around them suddenly turned cold and serious. Jake watched in horror as people pulled out their phones, not to take fun vacation pictures, but to record what they had just witnessed. The guard himself remained absolutely motionless. Beer dripped steadily from his red jacket and black bearskin hat, running down his face and onto his boots, but he didn't wipe it away. He didn't even blink. His eyes stayed focused straight ahead, and his expression remained completely professional. Jake had never seen anything like it. The guard's discipline was incredible, but it also made Danny's action look 1,000 times worse. Here was a young soldier doing his job with perfect dedication, and Danny had just humiliated him for no reason except to show off. "Oh man, did you see that?" Tony was saying, holding up his phone. He didn't even flinch. "That's insane." Rick was laughing and trying to get a better angle for his video. "This is going to be the best story ever. Wait until everyone back home sees this." But Jake noticed that the other tourists around them weren't laughing. In fact, they looked disgusted and angry. An older British woman was shaking her head and talking angrily to her husband. A family with children had moved away from them completely. "You Americans should be ashamed of yourselves," the British woman said loudly, looking directly at Danny. "That young man is serving his country, and you treat him like a circus act." Danny's confident grin faltered for a moment, but he tried to play it off. "Come on, lady. It's just beer. No harm done. No harm done," another voice said. This time it was a man with an Australian accent who had been taking pictures nearby. "Mate, you just assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard. That's not a joke." Jake could see that the situation was spinning out of control quickly. More people were gathering around them, and most of them looked angry rather than amused. Phones were pointed in their direction from multiple angles, recording everything. "Maybe we should get out of here," Jake whispered urgently to his friends. "This doesn't feel right." But before anyone could respond, Jake noticed two men in plain clothes moving through the crowd toward them. They weren't wearing uniforms, but something about the way they walked and the serious expressions on their faces made Jake's stomach sink even further. "Danny Williams," one of the men said, approaching their group. He was tall and had the kind of stern voice that made it clear he wasn't asking a question. Danny looked confused. "Yeah, that's me. How do you know my name?" "Metropolitan Police," the man said, showing a badge. "You're under arrest for assault and disturbing the peace." The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He had hoped that maybe they would just get a warning or be asked to leave. But arrest? This was serious. "Arrest?" Danny said, his voice rising. "For what?" "I didn't assault anyone. I just spilled some beer." "You deliberately poured alcohol on a member of the Queen's Guard who was performing his official duties," the second police officer explained while moving to Danny's other side. "That constitutes assault under British law." Jake watched in shock as the officers began handcuffing Danny. His friend's confident attitude had completely disappeared, replaced by panic and confusion. "This is crazy," Danny protested. "I'm a tourist. I didn't know it was illegal to spill beer on someone." "Ignorance of the law isn't a defense, sir," the first officer replied calmly. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be given in evidence." The crowd of tourists was getting larger now, all of them recording the arrest on their phones. Jake could see at least a dozen cameras pointed at them, capturing every moment of Danny's humiliation. Tony and Rick had stopped laughing completely. They looked scared and were trying to back away from the situation, but the police officers noticed them too. "Were you gentlemen with Mr. Williams when this incident occurred?" the second officer asked. "We were just watching," Rick said quickly. "We didn't do anything." "We have multiple witnesses and video evidence showing you encouraging and recording the assault," the officer replied. "We'll need you to come with us as well for questioning." Jake felt like he was living in a nightmare. What had started as a fun afternoon reunion with old friends had turned into a legal disaster in a matter of minutes. As the police led Danny away in handcuffs, Jake could hear people in the crowd making comments about disrespectful Americans and stupid tourists. The British woman from earlier was giving an interview to someone with a professional-looking camera, describing what she had witnessed. "Excuse me, sir," a voice said behind Jake. He turned to see a young police officer approaching him. "Were you part of this group?" Jake wanted to lie, to say he had just been standing nearby when it happened, but he knew there were probably videos showing him with his friends, and lying to the police would only make things worse. "Yes," he said quietly, "but I tried to stop them. I told them it was a bad idea." "I understand, sir, but we'll still need you to come to the station to give a statement," the officer said politely but firmly. As Jake was being led away, he looked back at the Royal Guard one more time. Another soldier had appeared to relieve him, and the beer-soaked guard was finally walking away from his post. Even now, his posture was perfect and his expression was professional. He showed no anger or frustration, just quiet dignity. The replacement guard took his position and stood just as still and focused as the first one had. It was like nothing had happened at all, except for the growing crowd of tourists talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Jake realized that within hours, videos of Danny pouring beer on the guard would probably be all over social media. Their faces would be seen by thousands, maybe millions of people, all of them judging what they had done. As he was escorted toward a police vehicle, Jake could hear tourists still talking about the incident. Some were defending the Americans, saying it was just a prank gone wrong, but most seemed disgusted by the disrespect shown to the guard. "That poor young soldier," one woman was saying. "Standing there doing his job, and these tourists treat him like entertainment." Jake felt ashamed and angry at his friends, but mostly he felt sorry for the guard. The soldier had been doing his duty with perfect professionalism, and now he would probably be remembered not for his service, but for being the victim of a stupid prank by drunk American tourists. The police car doors closed, and Jake found himself sitting next to Danny, who was still in handcuffs and looking completely overwhelmed by what was happening to him. "This is insane, Jake," Danny said quietly. "How was I supposed to know they'd take this stuff so seriously over here?" Jake didn't answer. He was thinking about how quickly everything had gone wrong and wondering what other consequences they hadn't even considered yet. The police station was nothing like what Jake had expected from watching movies. It was busy and loud, with officers walking around carrying paperwork and talking on phones. The fluorescent lights were harsh and everything smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies. Jake, Danny, Tony, and Rick were separated immediately after arriving. Jake found himself sitting on a hard plastic chair in a small room with gray walls and no windows. A police officer had taken his passport and asked him basic questions about where he was staying and why he was in London. "You understand you're not under arrest at this time, Mr. Anderson," the officer explained. "But you were present during an incident involving assault on a member of the Queen's Guard, so we need a complete statement from you." Jake nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. Just 3 hours ago, he'd been having lunch with his college friends, excited about seeing London together. Now he was in a police station, potentially facing criminal charges in a foreign country. "Can you tell me exactly what happened this afternoon?" the officer asked, pulling out a notepad. Jake took a deep breath and tried to explain everything from the beginning. He told the officer about meeting his friends at the pub, about going to see Buckingham Palace, and about how his friends had become increasingly interested in testing the guard's patience. "Did you participate in or encourage the assault on the guard?" the officer asked. "No," Jake said firmly. "I actually tried to stop them. I told Danny it was a bad idea multiple times. I could see where things were heading and I didn't want any part of it." The officer made notes as Jake spoke. "Did you know Mr. Williams was planning to pour beer on the guard?" "I suspected he might do something stupid, but I didn't know exactly what. He had been talking about testing the guard's professionalism, and he kept looking at his beer cup in a way that made me nervous. Why didn't you remove yourself from the situation if you knew something inappropriate might happen?" That was a hard question for Jake to answer honestly. "I guess I didn't want to abandon my friends. And I hoped they would listen to reason and just take some pictures like normal tourists." The questioning continued for what felt like hours. The officer asked about their drinking, about their relationship to each other, and about whether they had planned the incident in advance. Jake answered everything truthfully, emphasizing repeatedly that he had tried to discourage his friend's behavior. "What happens now?" Jake asked when the officer seemed finished with his questions. "That depends on several factors," the officer explained. "Mr. Williams will definitely be charged with assault. The other 2 gentlemen were clearly encouraging and recording the incident, so they'll likely face charges as well. As for you, since multiple witnesses have confirmed that you tried to discourage the behavior, you'll probably be released with a warning." Jake felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief that he probably wouldn't face serious consequences, but guilt that his friends were in much worse trouble. "Can I see them?" Jake asked. "Not right now. They're still being processed and questioned. Mr. Williams will likely spend the night in custody since he was the primary perpetrator." The officer left Jake alone in the room for a while. Jake stared at the gray walls and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. He thought about the Royal Guard, still doing his job professionally even as beer dripped from his uniform. The image was burned into his mind. After what felt like forever, a different officer came in to talk to Jake. This one was older and seemed less formal than the first. "Mr. Anderson, I've reviewed your statement and spoken with witnesses at the scene. Several people confirmed that you appeared uncomfortable with your friend's behavior and tried to discourage them." Jake nodded, hoping this was good news. "However," the officer continued, "you were part of the group, and you didn't remove yourself from the situation when you knew something inappropriate was likely to happen. That shows poor judgment, even if you didn't participate directly." "I understand," Jake said. "I should have walked away." "Yes, you should have. The Queen's Guard are highly trained soldiers performing an important ceremonial duty. They represent centuries of British military tradition, and they deserve respect from visitors to our country." The officer's words hit Jake harder than he expected. He realized that he had been thinking of the incident mainly in terms of how it affected him and his friends. But there was a real person under that red uniform, a young soldier who had signed up to serve his country and had been humiliated by drunk tourists for no reason. "Is the guard okay?" Jake asked. "I mean, obviously he wasn't hurt physically, but this must have been embarrassing for him." The officer's expression softened slightly. "That's a thoughtful question, Mr. Anderson. The guard is fine. These soldiers are trained to deal with all kinds of situations, including disrespectful tourists. But yes, it's never pleasant to be treated as entertainment when you're trying to do your job with dignity." Jake felt even worse. He thought about how he would feel if someone came to his workplace and humiliated him just for fun, then recorded it to share with the world. "The good news for you," the officer continued, "is that we're not going to charge you with any crimes. However, you'll receive an official warning that will be kept on file. If you're ever involved in another incident during your stay in the UK, this warning will be taken into consideration." "Thank you," Jake said. "I really am sorry about what happened. I wish I had done more to stop it. Learn from this experience. Mr. Anderson, choose your companions more carefully, especially when you're representing your country as a tourist abroad." The officer processed Jake's release paperwork and returned his passport. As Jake was preparing to leave, he asked about his friends. "Mr. Williams will appear in court tomorrow morning. The other two will likely be released tonight with charges pending. They'll need to stay in London until their cases are resolved, which could take several days or even weeks." Jake's heart sank. Their vacation was supposed to last only 1 week, and now his friends might be stuck in London dealing with legal problems for much longer than that. "Can I wait for them to be released?" Jake asked. "That's up to you, but it could be quite late. Mr. Thompson and Mr. Rodriguez should be out within a few hours, but Mr. Williams won't be released until after his court appearance tomorrow." Jake decided to wait for Tony and Rick. He sat in the police station lobby, watching other people come and go, some in handcuffs, others looking worried or angry. It was a side of London he had never expected to see. While he waited, Jake checked his phone for the first time since the arrest. He had several missed calls from his family back home asking how his trip was going. He also had notifications from social media, which confused him until he realized that videos of the incident were probably already online. He searched for American tourist Buckingham Palace and immediately found multiple videos of Danny pouring beer on the guard. The footage was clear and showed all of their faces. The comments were overwhelmingly negative, calling them disrespectful, embarrassing, and worse. Jake felt sick as he scrolled through the reactions. People from around the world were expressing disgust at their behavior. Some were calling for them to be banned from the UK permanently. Others were making jokes about ugly Americans and demanding that they face serious consequences. One comment particularly stung. "That poor guard shows more class and dignity in 1 minute than these tourists show in their entire lives." Jake realized that their stupid mistake wasn't just affecting them personally, it was reinforcing negative stereotypes about American tourists and embarrassing their entire country. The video had already been shared thousands of times, and it was only going to get worse. When Tony and Rick were finally released around 10 o'clock that night, they looked exhausted and scared. Both had been charged with aiding and abetting assault and would have to return to court within 2 weeks. "This is a nightmare," Rick said as they walked out of the police station. "My job is going to fire me if they find out about this, and my parents are going to kill me." Tony was quiet, apparently still in shock. "I can't believe Danny is spending the night in jail. This was supposed to be a fun vacation." Jake didn't know what to say to comfort them. Their actions had consequences that went far beyond what any of them had imagined when they decided to test the guard's professionalism. As they walked back toward their hotels in the late evening darkness, Jake couldn't help but think about the guard again. Somewhere in London, that young soldier was probably at home having finished his shift and cleaned the beer from his uniform. Meanwhile, videos of his humiliation were being watched by people all over the world. It was a sobering reminder that actions have consequences, and that treating other people as entertainment can cause real harm to real lives. Jake barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the royal guard standing perfectly still as beer dripped from his uniform. When he finally gave up trying to sleep around 6 in the morning, Jake immediately checked his phone for updates about Danny's situation. The news was worse than he had feared. The videos from Buckingham Palace had exploded across social media overnight. The hashtag #DrunkAmericanTourist was trending on Twitter, and the story had been picked up by major news outlets around the world. Jake found articles about the incident on CNN, BBC, Fox News, and dozens of other websites. The headlines were brutal: "American Tourist Assaults Royal Guard," "Disrespectful Americans Embarrass Nation at Buckingham Palace," and "Drunk Tourist Shows Why Americans Have Bad Reputation Abroad." But the worst part was reading the comments sections. Thousands of people from around the world were expressing their disgust and anger. British people were particularly upset, calling Danny's actions an insult to our military and typical American arrogance. Even Americans were angry. Many were commenting that people like Danny and his friends made all American tourists look bad and gave their country a terrible reputation internationally. Jake's phone rang while he was reading the comments. It was his sister calling from Colorado. "Jake, please tell me that's not you in those videos going around online," she said without even saying hello. "What videos?" Jake asked, though he already knew what she was talking about. "Don't play dumb with me. There are videos everywhere of some American tourists being jerks to a British guard. Mom saw it on Facebook and she's worried sick that you're involved." Jake didn't know what to say. He had hoped that maybe the story wouldn't make it back to the United States, or at least not to his family and friends back home. "I was there when it happened," Jake admitted. "But I wasn't the one who did it. I actually tried to stop my friend." "Your friend?" "Jake, what were you thinking? Mom is crying because she thinks you're going to end up in a British prison." "I'm not going to prison. The police already released me with just a warning, but my friend Danny is in serious trouble." His sister was quiet for a moment. "Jake, I've seen the videos. You're clearly visible standing right there. Even if you didn't do it yourself, people are going to associate you with it." That was exactly what Jake was afraid of. Even though he had tried to stop Danny, he would forever be linked to this incident. Anyone who saw the videos would remember him as one of the disrespectful American tourists who embarrassed their country. After hanging up with his sister, Jake got dressed and headed to the courthouse where Danny's hearing was scheduled. Tony and Rick were already there, looking tired and worried. "Have you guys seen the news?" Jake asked. "Unfortunately, yes," Tony replied. "My wife has been calling me every hour. She saw it on the morning news back home. Apparently it's being talked about on every major network." Rick looked even worse than the night before. "My boss already called me. He said if I get convicted of anything, I'm fired immediately. The company can't have employees who are known for causing international incidents." The courthouse was busier than Jake expected. As they waited for Danny's case to be called, Jake noticed several people with cameras and notebooks who looked like journalists. Word about the case had apparently spread beyond social media. When Danny finally appeared in court, he looked terrible. His hair was messy, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes from spending the night in jail. The confident, joking attitude from yesterday was completely gone. The judge was an older woman who looked stern and unimpressed as she read the charges against Danny. "Mr. Williams, you are charged with assault against a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces and disturbing the peace. How do you plead?" Danny's lawyer, a public defender who looked overwhelmed, whispered something in Danny's ear before he answered. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Danny said quietly. Jake was surprised by the plea. He had assumed Danny would plead guilty since there was clear video evidence of what he had done. The prosecutor, a confident-looking woman in her 40s, stood up to address the judge. "Your Honor, this case has attracted significant international attention due to the defendant's actions against one of our ceremonial guards. We have multiple video recordings of the incident, as well as dozens of eyewitness accounts," she continued. "The defendant, while intoxicated, deliberately poured alcoholic beverages on a member of the Queen's Guard who was performing his official duties. This was not an accident or a moment of poor judgment. It was a calculated act of disrespect against a British serviceman." Danny's lawyer tried to argue that his client was a tourist who didn't understand the seriousness of his actions and that he was intoxicated and not thinking clearly. But the judge didn't seem sympathetic to these arguments. "Mr. Williams," the judge said directly to Danny, "your actions have been viewed by millions of people around the world. You have brought shame not only on yourself but on your country. British ceremonial guards are highly respected members of our military, and they deserve to perform their duties without being subjected to assault and humiliation." Jake could see Danny shrinking in his seat as the judge spoke. The reality of his situation was finally hitting him. "I'm setting bail at £5,000, the judge announced. "Trial is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Mr. Williams, you are not to leave London until this matter is resolved." £5,000 was about $6,000. Jake wasn't sure if Danny had that kind of money available, especially since he was supposed to be on vacation. After the hearing, they met with Danny outside the courthouse. He looked devastated. "I can't believe this is happening," Danny said. 2 weeks? I'm supposed to be back at work on Monday. And where am I going to get £5,000 for bail? We'll figure something out, Tony said, though he didn't sound confident. Maybe we can pool our money together. But Jake knew that even if they could come up with the bail money, Danny's problems were just beginning. The viral videos meant that his actions would follow him for years, maybe forever. As they walked away from the courthouse, Jake noticed that one of the journalists had followed them outside. She was a young woman with a professional camera and a press badge. "Excuse me," she said, approaching their group. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from the London Tribune. Would any of you like to make a statement about what happened yesterday?" "No comment," Rick said quickly, trying to walk past her, but the journalist persisted. "The public is very interested in this story. It's being discussed all over social media and on news programs. Don't you think you owe the British people an apology?" Jake stopped walking. The journalist was right. They did owe people an apology, not just to the guard they had disrespected, but to everyone who had been offended by their actions. "Yes," Jake said, ignoring his friend's attempts to pull him away. "We're very sorry for what happened. It was disrespectful and stupid, and we're embarrassed by our behavior." "But you weren't the one who poured the beer," the journalist pointed out. "No, but I was there and I should have done more to stop it. The guard was just doing his job and he didn't deserve to be treated that way." The journalist asked a few more questions, which Jake answered honestly. He talked about how ashamed he felt and how he wished he could apologize to the guard personally. After the journalist left, Tony and Rick were angry with Jake for talking to her. "Are you crazy?" Rick said. "Now there's going to be even more attention on us." But Jake felt like talking to the reporter was the right thing to do. They had made a mistake that hurt someone else, and the least they could do was acknowledge it and apologize publicly. That afternoon, Jake's interview appeared in the online edition of the London Tribune. The headline read, "American tourist expresses regret for friend's actions against Royal Guard." Within hours, Jake's apology was being shared across social media. Some people appreciated his honesty and willingness to take responsibility, but others criticized him for not doing more to stop the incident in the first place. Jake realized that no matter what he said or did now, he would always be connected to this story. The videos would never disappear from the internet, and his face would forever be associated with the drunk American tourist incident. As he sat in his hotel room that evening, Jake thought about how quickly everything had changed. Just 2 days ago, he had been an anonymous tourist excited about seeing London. Now he was part of an international news story that was making headlines around the world. The worst part was knowing that somewhere in London, a young soldier was probably dealing with his own unwanted fame. The guard's professionalism had made him a hero to many people, but Jake knew that being the center of so much attention probably wasn't something the soldier had wanted. All because his friend had decided to pour beer on someone who was just trying to do his job. 3 months later, Jake was back in Denver, but the London incident still followed him everywhere. The videos had never stopped circulating on social media, and new people discovered them every day. Whenever someone searched his name online, the first results were articles about the American tourist Royal Guard incident. Danny had eventually been convicted and sentenced to pay a hefty fine of £3,000, plus court costs that brought his total financial penalty to nearly $5,000. He had also received a lifetime ban from all royal properties in the United Kingdom, meaning he could never again visit Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, or any other site connected to the British royal family. But the legal consequences were just the beginning of Danny's problems. When he finally returned to Portland after spending 2 weeks in London dealing with his case, Danny discovered that his employer at the brewery had fired him. The company's management felt that having an employee who was famous for disrespecting foreign military personnel was bad for their image. They said I violated the company's code of conduct about representing them professionally at all times, Danny explained to Jake during one of their phone calls. Apparently that includes when I'm on vacation in other countries. Finding new employment had been nearly impossible for Danny. Every potential employer who searched his name online found the videos and news articles about his arrest. Several job interviews had ended abruptly when managers recognized him from the viral footage. I've been applying for jobs for 2 months, Danny said. Every time I think I have a chance, someone figures out who I am, and suddenly they're not interested anymore. Tony and Rick had faced their own consequences, though not as severe as Danny's. Both had been convicted of minor charges related to encouraging and recording the incident. They received fines and probation, but managed to keep their jobs after promising their employers that nothing like this would ever happen again. However, their reputations had been permanently damaged. Rick's company had passed him over for a promotion he had been expecting, and Tony's wife was still angry about the embarrassment the incident had caused their family. "My kids got teased at school because their dad was in those videos," Tony told Jake. Other parents were showing the footage to their children as an example of how not to behave. It was humiliating. Jake had escaped the worst of the legal consequences, but he hadn't escaped the social ones. His interview with the London Tribune journalist had helped somewhat. Many people appreciated that he had apologized and taken responsibility for not doing more to stop his friends. But he was still recognizable in the videos, and that connection would never go away. His employer at the car dealership had been understanding, but Jake could tell that his manager was disappointed in him. During his performance review, his boss had mentioned that the company valued employees who showed good judgment both at work and in their personal lives. "I'm not saying this will affect your career here directly," his manager had said, "but leadership positions require people who can represent the company well in all situations. That includes how you handle yourself when you're traveling or socializing." The message was clear. The London incident would be a factor in any future promotions or opportunities. Jake had also noticed changes in his personal relationships. Some friends and family members treated him differently now, as if they weren't sure what kind of person he really was. His sister had eventually forgiven him, but she still brought up the incident whenever they discussed travel or responsibility. "I just don't understand how you could let your friends do something so stupid," she would say. "You're usually the responsible one in the group." Jake had asked himself the same question hundreds of times. Why hadn't he walked away when he saw where things were heading? Why had he stayed with his friends instead of removing himself from the situation? The answer, he realized, was that he had been more concerned about fitting in with his old college buddies than about doing the right thing. He had been afraid of looking like a killjoy or a coward, so he had stayed silent and hoped for the best. But the most painful part of the whole experience was thinking about the Royal Guard. Jake had tried to find out more about the soldier who had been the victim of their stupid prank, but the British military didn't release personal information about their personnel. However, Jake had learned that the Guard had received commendations from his superiors for his professionalism during the incident. Military officials had praised his discipline and self-control in the face of deliberate provocation. That young soldier showed exactly the kind of character and dedication we expect from our ceremonial guards, a military spokesperson had told reporters. His ability to maintain his composure and continue performing his duties despite being assaulted was exemplary. The Guard had become something of a hero in British media, with many people praising his dignity and professionalism. But Jake knew that being famous for being the victim of a drunk tourist's prank probably wasn't how the soldier had wanted to be remembered. Jake had written several letters to British military officials, asking if he could somehow apologize to the Guard personally. He never received a response, which he understood. The military probably wanted to protect their personnel from further contact with the tourists who had caused the incident. The financial costs of the London trip had been significant for all of them. Danny's legal fees, fines, and extended stay in London had cost him over $10,000. Tony and Rick had each spent several $1,000s on their own legal problems. Even Jake had lost money by cutting his vacation short and flying home early to deal with the media attention. But the social and professional costs had been much worse than the financial ones. All four men had learned that in the age of social media and viral videos, a single moment of poor judgment could have consequences that lasted for years. Jake often thought about how different things might have been if he had made different choices that day. If he had refused to go along with his friend's plan to test the Guard's patience. If he had walked away when he saw Danny preparing to pour the beer. If he had been brave enough to physically stop Danny from going through with it. Any of those actions might have prevented the incident entirely. But Jake had chosen the path of least resistance, and now he had to live with the consequences. The viral videos had been viewed millions of times, shared across every social media platform, and discussed in news programs around the world. They had become a symbol of disrespectful tourism and entitled behavior, a cautionary tale about how not to act when visiting other countries. Jake had learned that actions have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. What had seemed like a harmless prank to Danny had resulted in criminal charges, job loss, financial ruin, and permanent damage to his reputation. The guard who had been the victim of their stupidity had maintained his professionalism and dignity, while they had revealed their immaturity and poor judgment to the entire world. 6 months after the incident, Jake still received occasional messages from strangers who recognized him from the videos. Most were critical, but some were supportive of his apology and his apparent regret. A few people had even shared their own stories of making mistakes while traveling and facing unexpected consequences. One message particularly stuck with him. It was from a British military veteran who had served as a ceremonial guard earlier in his career. "I wanted you to know that I appreciate your apology," the veteran had written. "Standing guard duty is harder than most people realize, and it means a lot when someone acknowledges that we're real people doing an important job, not just tourist attractions." The message had made Jake feel slightly better, but it also reinforced his regret about the entire situation. He would always wonder what would have happened if he had been braver that day, if he had chosen to do the right thing instead of going along with his friends. The London incident had taught Jake that being a good person wasn't just about avoiding doing bad things yourself. It was also about having the courage to prevent bad things when you had the power to stop them. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life, along with the permanent reminder that lived on the internet for anyone to see.